Tanrı'nın varlığına dair kozmolojik argüman nedir?
Well, so actually there are several different arguments. So it's more of a family of arguments rather than a single one. But I think they all have in common the idea that we're attempting to demonstrate, they're all an attempt to demonstrate that there is an uncaused or first cause of other facts of some kind. And the kind of cosmological argument that is my favorite version is one that you find some roots of in Aristotle and in Avicenna, actually Ibn Sina and Aquinas. And this is an argument that sometimes, in Leibniz as well, sometimes called an argument from contingency. So the thought is that we find in the world many contingent facts, where at the moment, contingent just means a fact that could have been otherwise. It exists, but it might not have existed, that very fact. So I might be holding a cup right now, and the fact that I'm holding a cup, at exactly 2:01 p.m. Central Daylight Time, November 13th or 14th, 2022, that's a contingent fact because I might not have picked up the cup, right? So I might have been cupless at that very same instant in time. So it's a contingent fact. And the argument says something like this, that whenever we find a contingent fact in the world, or even a set or a collection of contingent facts, we expect to find a sort of a causal explanation. We expect to find something that had the power to bring that fact into being, and that did in fact bring that power into being. So in this particular case, of course, the fact is that I have a power to pick up cups, and I exercise that power to pick up a cup at a particular moment in time, thereby producing the fact that I was holding the cup, right? And so we wouldn't expect to find me just holding the cup with no cause, right? Just sort of popping into existence without a cause. We always expect to find some kind of antecedent conditions involving something like a causal power, the power to bring about the fact, as we look backward. Now, so now, of course, the question is, if we start tracing this chain of causation backwards, so from one event or fact to a prior fact that causes it, and then we ask, well, why did that fact exist? Was that contingent? Is it contingent that I exist and that I have enough power to lift a cup? Yes, because I might not have existed at all. Right? My parents might not have met. I would have never existed. So we can find an earlier fact involving my parents and their procreative powers that produced me, right? But of course, they had to have causes as well, and so on. So we trace the process back. Now here, there's a kind of fork in the road. And again, the argument can go one of two ways. Traditionally, starting with Aristotle and continuing all the way through to Aquinas, there's the argument that you cannot have an infinite regress of causes, at least not of a certain kind. That is, you cannot have a regress where the very existence of each thing depends upon the prior fact, and its existence depends on some still earlier fact, and so on, without having any kind of underlying cause of the whole thing, so to speak, right? Another way to go, and I think Avicenna was the first one to develop this idea, although you also find it in Scotus and Leibniz and some others, is to say, well, let's just consider the sum total of all the contingent facts in the world. Let's just call that the cosmos. Okay, that's all the contingent facts, or as I argued in my paper 97, we should actually look at all the wholly contingent facts. So that's a fact that's contingent, and all of its parts are also contingent. So there's nothing necessary here at all, just pure contingency. Take the sum of all the contingent facts. And in my 97 paper, I prove that sum of contingent facts is itself contingent, right? In fact, it's super contingent. It's one of the most contingent things there is. And so therefore, we should expect to find some kind of cause of the whole cosmos, right? But the cause of the cosmos can't be a contingent fact because we've already included all the contingent facts in the cosmos itself. And the cause has to be separate from the effect in some sense. And in fact, if the cosmos contains all the wholly contingent facts, then anything that's not part of the cosmos will have to be completely necessary. It can't have any contingent parts to it. right? So you'll have something that's a wholly necessary fact, which causes the whole cosmos. So either whether you rule out infinite regresses, you have to find a first cause, or you go this other route, which is sort of the aggregation method, put together all the contingent facts and then ask what's the cause of that. In both cases, you get something that's necessary, a necessary cause of the rest of things. So that's, and actually there's a further issue here, which is whether among the necessary things, there might be cause and effect relationships. Could some necessary truths depend on other necessary truths? And that's possible. For instance, you might think that mathematical truths like 2 + 2 is 4 are necessary truths, but they maybe depend on something else like God's mind in some way, God's thinking certain things. So anyway, we could run the same sort of argument there among things that are necessary in themselves versus things that are necessary through another, that are caused to be necessary. And again, we can work our way back to a first cause, something that's not only necessary, but necessary in and of itself, necessary without being caused to be necessary by anything else, right? The absolute first cause. So that's the general strategy of the cosmological argument. And then, of course, the next step is to ask, well, what would this first cause have to be like, right? What kind of characteristics can we draw out of it? Well, one, of course, we've already established is it's going to be a necessary being, right? And it's going to be necessary in itself. It's not going to be caused to be necessary by anything else. So, I've argued in some of my papers and elsewhere that once you get to such a being, you can derive certain consequences from it. So, well, first of all, actually a being, right? So we've got a fact, right? That's a necessary fact that causes all the other facts. But a fact that has causal power has to involve a being that has causal power, right? So there has to be something that exists in this fact, right? The fact has to be about the existence of something that has enough causal power to cause all the other facts in the world. So it's going to have to be, there's got to be a necessarily existing thing, right? That's the first step. Secondly, we can say that this necessarily existing thing has got to be simple. That is, it shouldn't have any parts. Because if it had parts, then we'd have to have an explanation to what put those parts together, what composed this thing into a whole. But the first cause we're looking for, it has to exist of itself. It can't be caused by anything else. And so it's got to be absolutely simple. It's also going to have all of its attributes necessarily, right? Because in order to exist, it's got to have a complete set of properties, attributes. But this basic fact, this necessary fact upon which all other facts depend, will have to not only have this thing existing, but also having all of its attributes. So those attributes will also be necessarily existing. And I've argued that suggests that this being would have to have infinite attributes, right? Because if it had any attribute to a finite degree, there would be an element of contingency involved. So if this being had intelligence, but only finite intelligence, IQ of 1 billion, let's say, then we could say, well, why not 1,000,000,001 or 1,000,000,000 - 1, right? It looks like there would have to be some explanation for why it had exactly that amount of intelligence and not just a little bit more, a little bit less. Whereas if the being has infinite, sort of unlimited intelligence, then there's nothing really to explain because there's no such thing as infinity -1 or +1, right? It's sort of isolated, metrically speaking, or it's immeasurable, you might say. It doesn't really have a measure. So if God has intelligence, it's going to be infinite intelligence. If he has power, it's going to be infinite power. If he has goodness, it's going to be infinite goodness, and so on. Now, of course, we could still ask, well, why think that this being has intelligence or power at all? Well, it has to have power, right? Because the idea is that it caused all the other things to exist. And moreover, it's the thing that in every possible situation causes all the contingent things to exist. So if anything could possibly exist, this being must have the power to make it exist. So it really has to have unlimited power, the kind of power to bring about anything that's possible whatsoever, right? But of course, it has to do so without actually having any of those finite attributes itself, right? So it has to have the power to create stars with size and mass and energy without having any size or mass or energy itself, right? Because if it did, it would be finite again. And the only sort of being that can do that would be a mind, right? Because a mind can conceive of things and thereby be able to bring about those things without actually having those things as attributes itself, right? I can think about a guitar and have the power to make a guitar without being a guitar, right? Or having anything guitar-like in my makeup. And so in a similar way, the best way to explain how this first being would be able to cause the world would be to assume that it has intelligence, and therefore infinite intelligence. It's aware of every possible being. It has the power to produce any possible being, and it actually exercises that power to produce the world that we see around us, the actual world we see around us. So that's the cosmological argument in the gist, I guess. The other thing that one might say is, as I've said in some of my papers, it's very helpful if you think about other arguments for God's existence to have the cosmological argument already in place, right? Because it can, for example, if you look at the design argument, right? Looking at the orderliness of the world, or the way the world is fine-tuned for life, as an argument for thinking there must be a designer behind the world. It's much easier to make this argument work if you already have a cause of the world in the picture, right? Because then you can say, okay, the world's been caused by something, and moreover, the effect has signs of intelligence in it, so therefore it's reasonable for us to attribute intelligence to the cause. If you don't do that, then it's much harder, I think, to make the argument that there has to be a cause that's a designer. The other nice thing about once you have the cosmological argument in place is you can immediately dispense with the objection of who made God or who caused God, because God is by definition the uncaused thing, right? And we've established there is an uncaused thing, right? So that issue is really off the table. We no longer have to worry about that. We just have to wonder, what would an uncaused thing be like? What would a thing be like that not only isn't caused, but couldn't possibly be caused? That's sort of beyond the realm of causation.